Como verán ustedes en el programa, el tema que va a abordar es el espacio físico y virtual de la Biblioteca del Futuro. Nos acompaña en la moderación de la mesa la maestra Helen Ladrón de Guevara Cox, quien es maestra en Historia por la Universidad de Guadalajara y maestra en Bibliotecología por la Universidad Estatal de Nueva York en Albany. La maestra Helen Ladrón de Guevara fue directora fundadora del Archivo Histórico de Jalisco, también directora del Instituto de Bibliotecas de la Universidad de Guadalajara y de la Biblioteca Pública del Estado de Jalisco. Cuenta con varias publicaciones en su haber como catedrática de la Universidad de Guadalajara y ha participado en diversos congresos, tanto nacionales como internacionales. Durante una época de su actividad profesional colaboró con la Biblioteca Pública de Chicago y con el Instituto Mexicano de Cultura y de Educación de esa misma ciudad. La maestra Ladrón de Guevara funge como asesora del proyecto del nuevo edificio de la Biblioteca Pública del Estado de Jalisco, Juan José Arriola, en el Centro Cultural Universitario de la Universidad de Guadalajara. Actualmente se desempeña como presidenta de la sección de Bibliotecas Públicas y presidenta de la Comisión de Relaciones Internacionales de la Asociación Mexicana de Bibliotecarios, Asociación Civil. Es miembro de algunas organizaciones bibliotecarias importantes como la American Library Association y como la IFLA. Le cedo la palabra a la maestra Helen Ladrón de Guevara Cox.
Muchas gracias por la invitación. Es un honor y un placer compartir una serie de ideas y experiencias que indudablemente tiene cada uno de nuestros participantes, que pues vienen con una gran experiencia. Creo que será de mucho provecho escuchar sus opiniones, qué es lo que piensan sobre la Biblioteca del Futuro, la Biblioteca Universitaria, y creo que esta mesa es muy completa porque va a tener el punto de vista de un arquitecto connotado mexicano, va a tener el punto de vista también de un experto en elaboración de programa de edificios de bibliotecas, y tenemos también la participación de otra experta que es consultora y que tiene una gran experiencia y nos hablará sobre la Biblioteca Académica del Futuro. Tengo el placer de presentar en primer lugar a Barbie Kaiser, así se pronuncia su apellido, no sé, Kaiser, y ella es, bueno, lo voy a traducir, es una administradora en recursos de información y vive en el área metropolitana de Washington. Los últimos 30 años, Barbie ha estado muy interesada en que se conozca más sobre el acceso a la información, la disponibilidad de los recursos de información dentro de la administración de corporaciones y presta bastante atención en la asistencia para que se maximice esa utilización. Ha creado y ha hecho varios trabajos de reingeniería de bibliotecas corporativas y de centros de información para facilitar las decisiones administrativas y acciones en todos los niveles de esas organizaciones. Barbie nos invita, y a través de su trabajo, que se basa bastante en la innovación y en la administración de la información, para que los clientes mejoren sus profits, sus ganancias y crecimiento personal. Entonces, su experiencia tiene que ver también pues en este mundo de bibliotecas corporativas, pero está ampliamente preparada, tiene una maestría en Bibliotecología y Ciencias de la Información de la Universidad de Case Western Reserve, y han sido un miembro activo, bastante activo, en la SLA, que es la Asociación de Bibliotecas Especializadas. Actualmente sirve en el Consejo Consultivo de Ética de la Información, aspecto pues interesante, y es vicepresidenta o co-chair de la sección de Mercadotecnia y Liderazgo en la administración, en una división también de esta otra asociación. Pues tiene una actividad muy impresionante también, ha recibido varios premios, ha sido recipiente del reconocimiento o premio William T. Knox de la Asociación de Administradores de Información, y en el año 2005 obtuvo el premio presidencial por su trabajo internacional de la misma asociación SLA, y recibió en el año, hace 2 años, el premio del liderazgo Dow Jones Award, y ha sido también una investigadora pagada por la beca Fulbright en Eslovenia y en Lituania. Bueno, pues quisiera tener el gusto de presentarla. Me pidió que lo acortara, pero creo que era muy interesante que vean también tu área de trabajo, que es un poco diferente, pero muy necesaria para lo que vas a tratar.
Great. Well, I will never send a bio that I haven't rewritten shorter for a conference. But we really have a very elastic kind of topic for today's discussion, and I'm going to, So I want to talk about academic libraries, and as beautiful as the libraries might be, it's not about the building, although it helps to work and to study in a building that is conducive to your work and study. I can show you what some other libraries are doing to make sure that they bring in students who don't normally come into the library anymore for the physical library. So they've had a number of ideas. This happens to be, I think this is Goucher, but it's not about the books on the shelves anymore either. And in fact, we've got lots of different kind of materials that should be readily available and free, and on whatever device you want. It's device independent. So I want you to begin to think about the library. Woo. So let's go back. Let's see. Yeah? Second one? Okay. 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 Once again. Okay. And once again. Okay. So for me, it is about knowledge transfer. What do I know that I need to get into your head? And obviously you can see that I use now, I've just moved to a new Mac, so I'm out of touch with this. So, and again, I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm going to get this right. So it's knowledge transfer in order to create new knowledge. I want students and professors and faculty and everybody at the university to be using the stuff that I've got in my library to create something new. Perhaps for my library, perhaps not. Come on. Okay. It's not necessarily about this. How many of you, are there people here who have never seen a card catalog before? Yeah? Okay. So I have a lot of students who have never seen this before. Okay. This helps to find material. And whether we have it there or we have it here, the issue is, how do we navigate to what we need, and how does this change as our users change? You know, libraries have been transformed by information technology revolution, but users evolve, sometimes very, very, very slowly. So we have a long and wide berth of people that we have to satisfy. And we have to not only think about the library of the future, but how do we make those other users who may be reluctant to change the way that they work to move on to a new way of working. I agree. I understand this. I write papers, and it took me forever to transform, and I'm going to drive the translators crazy for not writing this down for them, but when we had to drop idem and loxit from all those citations, it took me forever to learn the new way of doing things from American Psychological Association, APA, or MLA format. It just didn't feel good to me, but you have to do that. And I have to make the people who are resistant to using the new ways feel better about it. And that's my role as a librarian. How can I feel them more comfortable in using new ways, new mechanisms to get at what I think that they need to get at, and what they really do need to get at, and change the way they're doing things. One of the speakers this morning talked about not really understanding or seeing the value of Twitter to his work. Well, the last month or so, I've been doing a project for the Centers for Disease Control. And they asked me to find patient education materials for people with thalassemia, which is a genetic blood disorder. And their thought was to find brochures that might be PDF'd on the web. And what I did was, on the off chance that something would be written about it, I put it in my tweet deck so that I get delivery every day. Anytime anybody tweets about thalassemia, 20 a day from all over the world. And if the researchers are not cognizant of what is being said about thalassemia by patients that might be erroneous, how are they going to counter that with good patient education materials? So I have to open the researcher's mind to using these tools in a different way in order to be able to see what's on slideshare.net or YouTube. If they don't have a YouTube channel for this, they are going to be in serious, they're not going to be doing their job, is what I want to say. So I want to think about this kind of thing. I teach at Johns Hopkins. I teach knowledge management and competitive intelligence to MBA and MSIS students. So these are graduate students. They're already working. They're going to school at night. What's my role? I want to make sure that every single class that has a Blackboard place on Blackboard has a librarian attached to it who monitors what's going on. I know, we're teaching data mining and text mining, and I know that the New York Times had an article about that last Tuesday. I want to make sure that my students see that. That's what the librarian's role is. Not necessarily what's in the library, but what makes them and enriches their experience at the university so that when they go out in the world, they can manage that. Someone earlier today happened to mention the Biblioteca Alexandrina. This slide happens to come from Sohair Wastawi, who was the director of the library, who talks about people not coming to the library for whatever reason. And we're doing a lot more things in the library than we ever did before, but we've got to be where the users are. So we not only have to deliver things mobile, but we've got to be in the learning management system. I've got to be in their course textbook. I've got to see what's going on. I've got to be everywhere. And if they're not going to come to me, I need to go to them no matter where they are. It's sort of a marketing tool. I've taken this from the University of Minnesota libraries, but it just talks a little bit to the point that we need to be doing things and relating it back to our traditional way of life. So this is what I think it's all about. If it's not about the building, and it's not about the website, and it's not, anybody know what this is? Railroad? Yeah. I don't think of it as a railroad. I think of it as alignment, because it's aligned, right? Your efforts need to support, facilitate, enable your institution's mission and vision. And every institution is different. So you need to know what your mission and vision is. I would suspect that it has something to do with creating good, solid citizens in a global environment, right? Prepared to go out and make their mark in the world. It might be, and I added this slide because of the researchers this morning, it might be looking at the researchers and how they're doing things. And, you know, it's not about what's in the library. So we might have Scholar Universe from ProQuest in our library to help to connect the researchers with other researchers who have interests similar, but what happens if they leave the university? What happens to others? They need to know that Research to Experts works, that ResearchGate works, that labaume.org works to identify different communities doing research on different things. I know where Elsevier's Cyverse is another one that works pretty well if you don't have access to ProQuest Scholar Universe. So there are a lot of different tools that you can use. There are a lot of different ways of doing things. I'm teaching knowledge management this semester, and one of the assignments is for my students to interview practitioners in knowledge management. And all I did was put some requests out on LinkedIn groups for knowledge management and said, hey, I've got some students at Johns Hopkins. Anybody interested, let me know, and I'll put you on the list, and they can choose. And I got hundreds from all over the world that I could pick and choose from for my students to have a little bit wider exposure than just the people that I happen to know do knowledge management in the States. If I'm in an academic institution, I need to make sure that I'm no longer dealing with one discipline. There are multiple disciplines that interact with one another. There's no standalone discipline anymore. So I need to track those patterns and relationships among the academic disciplines and make sure that all of the academics that I deal with are aware of these. For me, in a university, I think all meetings have to start with a learning moment. And the learning moment has to come from a librarian. And the librarian will make it topic specific for the meeting. And they can come in to the meeting, they can come in virtually, they can record this. But it's sort of a plug for the library and relating it to what they're talking about, what they're doing. Because too many people think about the library as it was when they went to school all the way back then, and not how it is today. So it's about networks, it's about communities, it's about keeping those antennae up. I bet some of you here don't even know what this is because nobody uses these antennas. I probably should have put those satellite dishes, you would have been better off. So you need to make sure that you're aware of the priorities of your institution and how those priorities are changing and how you need to change in order to make sure that your library is supporting those priorities. So we talked about alignment for a second. There's that information needs assessment and audit that you need to do to make sure that you are aware of what's going on. There's also that assessment, okay? So stop counting. I don't care how many books you check out. I don't care how many people come to your website. I want to focus on outcomes. What did they do when they get there? How long did they spend? How did they use that material that they found? You know, it was so easy when students went to the library shelves, and librarians are pretty smart, you know, the book to the right and the book to the left of it also had material. If a student comes into the library today, they look for a book, they find one book, they check out one book, that's it. You know, it would be great. We have the wherewithal to be able to say, you know, people who checked this book out also looked at this one and this one. You may find it. Related books. Give them a choice, give them more to read. I know it seems as if we're spoon-feeding these children, but they really do need that help because that's the way they've learned how to work. So we need to acclimate what we do to their needs and then slowly shift them to where we want them to be, how we want them to think. So you need to go where your administration and faculty and students are, wherever they are. You need to slice and dice everything, cut it up, reuse it, repackage it. Don't do more work, just take it and redo it. Think about where your faculty fits into this mix. How do you get into that classroom, be a part of what they're doing, be a part of their research if that's the important part of what they're doing? Where are we the players and where are their points of pain? For me, that's the big thing. Where have you had trouble before? What can I do to alleviate that? And the route is never really straight or direct. There are going to be turns along the way. So we really need to be flexible. And, you know, I hate to say it about librarians, but we had these rules. And these rules were meant to, this is the way we did things in libraries. We're not necessarily known for being very flexible. So I want to think a lot about looking at the loyal users. Why are they loyal to us? Who are the influencers? Which groups, which people, who do I have to get to really understand what I'm doing? You know, and how do I deal and motivate that staff to want to be able to do more and to do differently? And I think that's the hardest thing to do. And it starts with who I recruit. What kinds of skills am I looking for? I'm a librarian. I don't need more librarians, really. You know, I need different skill sets in order to round out my team. So I want to begin with, who are we recruiting? Where are we recruiting from? And I want to use that old lessons learned. I want to learn from others. Yes, I can look at other academic libraries, and certainly other academic libraries are doing spectacular things. I can look at other types of libraries. There are all sorts of libraries that are doing excellent work, but there are also other industries that are learning to do things. And maybe I can learn a little bit from them. I know people use all the time, but in the United States, there was Blockbuster first, you know. They had video cassette stores that you could rent the videos and bring them back, and those went. And then there was Borders. Borders was no more, right? Because they didn't understand how to use the internet, how to make the physical location and the internet work together. And then there's the latest, Netflix. Okay, so they used to mail the CDs to you so that you could play. And then a couple of weeks ago, they said, we don't really want to do that anymore. We want to stream that to you. And people said, yeah, I don't want to change. So they said, okay, we give up. We'll go back to the old way. So we need to think about that. Think about where you turn when you need advice. I moved from New York City to Washington. I had to get a new doctor, right? Who did I ask? Where did I go? I know I can check the Doctors Association in Washington to find the best doctors, right? I know I could do research, but really, I asked my friends, you know? So if you are going to ask people for advice, you need to make sure that you understand that's how people get their information. So how are you going to influence their circles and their communities? It's not about whether you use Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or any of those other tools, although I think it's great when you use them. But I will tell you, again, I teach competitive intelligence, and you know, they go through a whole semester. In the last session, I go around the class and say, tell me what you learned. Okay. I didn't know that Google had an advanced search page. I really like yippee.com because they present faceted search in the left-hand side. So it's easier than having a whole big long list, right? I'm trying to think of some of the others that they've come up with in the last couple of years. But it's never anything about competitive intelligence. It's never anything remarkable that I've said or they're reading or the topic at hand. It's this kind of thing. And this is easy stuff. You know, I need to make sure that they know that. So I need to make sure that they see me as part of their community. I want to brand my library. I don't want to throw everything out. You know, what I did in the past was great and good for its time. I want to see how it can change and morph and evolve into something that is better for this time. And if I'm thinking strategically, I want to think of all the babies being born now. And what are they going to be using? I will tell you, I don't think it's going to be an iPad or an iPhone or a tablet. I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it's a chip in their head. But it's going to be different, and I need to make sure. So, and I borrowed this again from a good friend who says, you need to cultivate your communities so they don't thrive alone, right? You need to make sure you're there. So if you've got a website, you're adding new things all the time, a wiki, new things all the time. You're blogging each day. You're making it relevant. You're allowing them to get at it however they want to get at it, whether it's Facebook or any other means. You want to make sure that those ghost towns go away, you know, all those pages on your website that, you know, nobody's looked at in years and nobody's taken them down. They just exist. No links are good. No, the same thing with the communities. I like to build communities from behind. So I'm never taking the lead, but I'm slowly edging them in the direction that I think that they need to go. So I'm constantly seeding the community with things that may be a little bit farther afield than they had planned to go, but I think will help them. Whoops, and again. So let me just pull this. We're getting to the end here. Okay, so where does the librarian fit in the picture? Well, I would love to be on everybody's shoulder. And in fact, I'd love to be on both shoulders. I want them to be able to leave the university and say, God, I have this problem. Where would Barbie go to find the answer? And that's what I want to get that in their head so that it's not in a particular database or on a particular website. It's a way of thinking about who's likely to know that this is going on. Where do I turn? What kind of information do I need? There are some subjects that I only need to skim on the surface, and there are some that I really need to dive very deeply. And I want to make sure that they know the distinction. My students in competitive intelligence, as much as I tell them a third of your time is research, a third of your time is analyzing, a third of your time is creating a presentation to communicate what you now know about your industry or company. Well, you know, come week 6, they're still on the, gee, we really ought to look at this database. Because time management is not the issue. They don't know when they should stop and what they should be looking at. How deep should they be? So my prescript is to make myself essential to their work, invisible, standing behind them. I want to be obsolete. I want them to graduate and be able to do things on their own, and I want to be able to reinvent myself for the next generation that's coming into the university. So what is the future of academic libraries? Well, I think it's you. I don't think it's the building, I don't think it's the materials. I know I spent years doing quality service, change management kind of stuff. It's about the workers who are there and what you are doing and how you are engaging your community in the library's work. So I'll leave you with the question. Libraries need librarians, but I don't know if librarians really need libraries. You know, if I consider the world my library, I need to be that expert, and I'm not sure that it's the physical building that I need. And I want to close with one little plug here. I sat on the board of World Computer Exchange, and we are doing a project with the Ministry of Education here in Mexico for rural schools, and we are putting computers in rural schools around the country, in every province. We have developed libraries, and we have identified libraries and put them up because internet access is not always great. We've had permission to do this. We've identified some of the libraries in Spanish. I'm sitting here in a sea of knowledge here. If you've got any ideas about the kind of libraries that need to go onto these computers so that these high school students get to see this material, do let me know. So I'm going to sign off here and turn this over to somebody else. Please feel free to, tweet me, follow me, and be in contact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbie. Muchas gracias, Barbie. La ponencia o el trabajo que nos presenta o nos presentó Barbie. Okay. Otherwise, yeah, to the translation. Okay. Prefiero hablar en español, pero también lo podría hacer en inglés, pero ya que están los audífonos y traductores, hay que aprovechar su gran experiencia en traducir. Creo que nos has dejado una gran inquietud a los bibliotecarios, el que realmente muchos de nosotros, espero no incluirme en ellos, tenemos cierta rigidez en seguir los patrones, no digo que de hace 20 años, pero los patrones de hace 2, 3 años, a veces no nos movemos con la rapidez que debemos de hacerlo, y el consejo que nos das de la flexibilidad y el rol que debe de tener el bibliotecario de este momento y del futuro, que obviamente va a incidir en el trabajo en la biblioteca académica, biblioteca pública, cualquier tipo de biblioteca, es estar pendiente de las necesidades del usuario. Creo que esa es una de las tendencias que hay en cuanto al trabajo y que va a afectar la situación si es digital o el acceso físico. La inteligencia competitiva que debe de tener todo ciudadano de cualquier país para que el país no se estanque, y el rol que tiene que hacer la biblioteca para provocar esto. Yo quiero hacer un comentario. Acabo de estar en Estados Unidos y no podía creer que las librerías Borders habían cerrado. A lo mejor soy de la generación pasada y sí me gustaba porque yo creo que muchos de ustedes las conocen, llegaban, se tomaban el café, había los sillones, sacaban los libros de las estanterías, se sentaban, lo leían, ni tenían que comprarlo, se informaban y lo volvían a colocar en su lugar. Pero efectivamente faltaba ese componente que dices de relacionarlo con la web y hacer unas búsquedas y dar respuestas mucho más amplias, que a lo mejor no había el libro en esa librería o en esa cadena y a lo mejor estaba en otra cadena, y que hubiera un mayor enlace. Y creo que ese es el secreto del éxito que nos está proponiendo Barbie, de las bibliotecas académicas, que fue el tema de su ponencia. Pues el trabajar, el networking, la colaboración, no vamos a tener la solución en cada biblioteca, hay que estar conectados, utilizar los nuevos medios sociales, el ejemplo que dio de que el usuario se sienta confortable, porque hay usuarios que, digamos, vienen de ya personas muy mayores y es muy difícil hacerlos que utilicen los nuevos medios. Bueno, no decirle, oiga, usted está obsoleto y no puede, entonces hacer que se sienta confortable para que siga en esta modernidad y aproveche todos estos recursos económicos. La misión que mencionas es muy importante, que los bibliotecarios tengamos en cuenta la misión de la institución y sobre todo crear ciudadanos, alumnos, investigadores sólidos, informados para la generación de nuevo conocimiento y solución de los problemas actuales y evitar futuros problemas. Muchas gracias, Barbie. Las preguntas las vamos a dejar al final, si quieren ir anotándolas, y pues les pediría que puede ser por escrito o de viva voz. Como ya nos estamos adentrando un poco, habló Barbie de los aspectos que podemos, cómo acceder a esta información, y no necesariamente dentro de una biblioteca, obviamente todos sabemos que es remoto. Este tipo de actitud que ella menciona del nuevo bibliotecario proactivo, obviamente tiene un impacto en el diseño, que finalmente hablaremos con el arquitecto, lo invitaremos, pero Anders Dahlgren es un experto en la planeación de espacios bibliotecarios. Puede ser remodelación, puede ser una nueva biblioteca o transformar una biblioteca, un edificio existente. Él estableció su firma de consultores, él es el presidente, y ha trabajado en la planeación de más de 150 bibliotecas. Ha tenido, aquí es muy modesto, pero él ha trabajado en casi todo Estados Unidos, en asesorías en Canadá, algunas en África, en Rusia, o sea, tiene una amplia experiencia en este campo. Tuve el gusto de conocerlo porque hizo el programa de necesidades del edificio de la nueva biblioteca pública del estado de Jalisco, y pues pudimos, todos los que participamos en cierta forma en el proyecto, dándole información de un plan maestro trasladado a un programa de necesidades, pues nos, hasta los arquitectos, y perdón arquitectos, se quitaban la cachucha ante el trabajo de Anders. Ese es uno de sus trabajos que ha hecho en México. Ha sido también miembro del jurado y ha presidido dentro del American Library Association. Hay una sección también que se dedica a primero conocer qué nuevas bibliotecas se han construido, cuáles se han remodelado, cuáles han tenido las mejores adaptaciones dentro del American Library Association, y cada, no sé, how often do they meet at ALA for the competition at the new libraries? Cada 2 años. Entonces, él ha sido presidente de esta sección dentro de la ALA que premia a los mejores edificios, y también ha trabajado fuertemente dentro de la IFLA en la sección de biblioteca, edificios para bibliotecas y su equipamiento. Dentro de la IFLA ha sido también chair de esta sección y ha participado en una obra que se las recomiendo, que aquí la traigo, Anders. La quiero enseñar a todos, porque a los que estén interesados entre espacios virtuales, físicos, esta es una obra que sacó la IFLA, que son unas guías para la creación de nuevas bibliotecas en la cuestión física, pero tomar en cuenta de los aspectos que habló Barbie, las necesidades de los usuarios, etcétera. Y bueno, lo consiguen por medio de la IFLA, y él es también coautor de esta obra, más otras. Bueno, yo me he brincado mucho de lo que mandaste por escrito. Creo que mencioné lo principal, pero bueno, mencionarles que la premiación que da la American Library Association para estos nuevos los edificios de bibliotecas se trabaja en combinación con el American Institute of Architects, el Instituto Americano de Arquitectos. Es un trabajo en colaboración de bibliotecarios con arquitectos. Entonces, esto da una garantía de que conozcamos los bibliotecarios de proyectos interesantes y si no seguir el modelo, pero sí ver por qué fue ganador, en qué acertaron para hacer y que fuera premiada la biblioteca. Vamos a escuchar ahora a Anders Dahlgren, su exposición.
Well, thank you, Helen. I too have a PowerPoint. Some years ago, the Chicago Tribune ran an article, said PowerPoint is the tool of the devil. Pretty much agree, but we're going to do this anyway. My thanks to the conference sponsors and organizers and to Helen for the invitation to come and visit with you over the next few days. Planning a library facility obligates us to take the long view. The literature on library building planning typically recommends a 20-year planning horizon. We're supposed to try and anticipate what our users will need 20 years in the future. We take that long view for a very practical reason. No matter what kind of library we're talking about, a university library, a college library, public library, school library, most of the time our institutions don't get to build a new library building or expand or improve the existing library building, but about once in a generation, if that. We don't have the luxury of building something new every couple years. Case in point, Illinois Wesleyan University. It's one of the academic institutions in Bloomington Normal, Illinois, where I live. About 100 years ago, IWU opened the Buck Memorial Library. In the 1960s, having outgrown Buck, the Sheehan Library was opened, and in 2002, the Ames Library replaced the Sheehan Library. Here's the Buck Library. Here's the new Ames Library. And I'm afraid some of you might not be able to see at the bottom of the slide. Here's the Sheehan Library. It's now a hole in the ground as it's being remodeled. They're using that land to build some new classrooms. But the idea is 100 years, give or take, 3 libraries. We don't have many chances to get it right. Moreover, as I'm sure all of you know, the challenge of getting it right is complicated by the fact, as I'm fond of saying, that the tectonic plates of library service keep on shifting. 15 years ago, this conference met to ponder the library of the future. In part, the focus of this meeting is to revisit those forecasts from 15 years ago and see how we did. In part, the focus is to forecast ahead 15 years in the future, maybe 20 years. Now, Gary Brown alluded to this in his comments this morning, but who among us could have anticipated back in 1996 that in 2001, the iPod, together with the iTunes Music Store, would revolutionize how we would listen to music? Back then, who among us could have anticipated the release of the iPhone in 2007? And who among us could have anticipated the release of the iPad less than 2 years ago? And those are just the examples. Those are just examples from a single company. Consider the corresponding products from Motorola, HTC, Amazon, and more. We face a very different landscape today than we thought we would in 1996. And 15 years from now, the landscape will probably be just as unexpected and just as surprising. As I pondered this presentation, my thoughts kept returning to the fact that the library of the future hadn't been built yet. So it's impossible for me to actually show you what the library of the future will look like. We'll have to imagine it together. And perhaps the most concrete way that we can consider the library of the future in this forum is to think of ways that academic libraries, and other types of libraries for that matter, are changing today. How are the libraries and how are their facilities changing today? I'd argue that the most pervasive change is a shift from the library as a collection-centric space to the library as a user-centric space. I mean, this is at the heart of Dr. Sarukhan's comments as he started us off this morning, his notions of the library needing to be a place for the exchange of ideas, the library as a center for social conveyance. Last year, I was working with the public library in Tupelo, Mississippi, and we struck upon the descriptive phrase that the new library in Tupelo, when it comes to be, the new library in Tupelo should be a place of connections and collections. Now, the library staff and we all thought we were pretty clever coming up with that phrase, but I have to assume there are plenty of other folks out there who are more clever than we are who have already come up with that phrase. But be that as it may, it's a phrase that I think really captures the characteristics of the library more and more. Public library, academic, any kind of library. Connections and collections. In Tupelo, we deliberately put connections ahead of collections. Collections remain a core feature of the library, but we felt that connections will become an increasingly important part of the library's overall role. And in consideration of the library's transition from a collection-centric place to a user-centric place, the concept of connections corresponds to the user. It's about the user making connections. Connections with collections, connections with information, connections to electronic resources, connections made remotely via the internet, connections made face-to-face and in person. This transition from collections to connections, I think, is also reflected in the notion that the 21st century library will be very different from a 20th century library. As we see on this slide, where the library we grew up with, perhaps represented permanence, the library of the future will represent transience. Where the library of the past represented stability or solidity, the library of the future will embrace flexibility. Other dichotomies characterize this shift from old to new as well. Solemnity, playfulness, solitude, communal, quiet, noise, status quo versus innovation, collections and connections. Earlier this year, within the American Library Association's Association for College and Research Libraries, their Research Planning and Review Committee published 2010's top trends for academic libraries, top 10 trends for academic libraries. On the facilities front, the most significant trend they highlighted was a decrease in space for supporting collections and the repurposing of that space for student use. As I'm sure, again, I'm not necessarily saying anything you all don't know, but academic libraries are withdrawing journal backruns and other materials as more and more of that material is available through permanent online archives. Karen Schmidt, the university librarian at the Ames Library back home at the Illinois Wesleyan University, observed that Ames is reducing the scale of the library's collections. It started with a project to reduce the scope of the reference collection, withdrawing more than half of that collection that had been in place on opening day back in 2002. Little quick sidebar drawn from a public library setting. These trends are affecting libraries of all types. I've been working with the public library in Barrington, Illinois for about a year now. When I started working with them, the head of reference and adult services, who, if she were left to her own devices, I suspect would be a rather conventional librarian, announced to me very proudly that her department had just recently completed with a weeding of the library's reference collection, reducing the inventory from 8,000 volumes to 4,000 volumes. To which the director of the library said, only slightly tongue-in-cheek, Only 3,999 to go, Rose. Returning to an academic setting, Schmidt from IWU offered that while her library is reducing some inventories, there's a need to expand the library's archives. She describes the archives as her institution's single most unique resource. The Ames Library has been open less than 10 years, but already the archives have reached their planned capacity. And the library needs to explore strategies to capture new space to continue to expand the archives. So while the space needed for conventional shelving, or conventional collections, I should say, may be shrinking, that space may indeed be repurposed for specialized and other unique local collections. Collection space is also being reduced in many academic libraries, as many academic libraries move lesser used materials into storage collections, sometimes off-site. The new undergraduate library at the University of Chicago maintains a storage collection, and the public space in that library is free, open, airy, free of, completely clear of obstructions. At the University of Missouri, Kansas City, an addition was placed on the main library to house, there it is, has been placed on the building. Here's the addition at the bottom part of this slide to house a robotic high-density storage device. This is that high-density storage device. You have tall stacks of racks housing bins that carry the collection. When a request is made, the retrieval element, which is this gizmo down here in the bottom, the retrieval element travels down the transitway between the racks, arriving at the proper bin, returning that bin to a staff workstation where the requested item is pulled and then delivered to the student. The principal advantage of a system like this is that the collection doesn't have to be stored by classification number, but it can be stored by size, which in turn maximizes the density of this collection. Within this same volume, the University of Missouri at Kansas City can store 7 times as much material as they could with conventional shelving. The trade-off, the downside, and there's always a trade-off, is that you lose the serendipity of finding things on the stacks. I mean, the collection is no longer organized, by classification number. It's no longer directly accessible by the students. Barbie mentioned finding materials on 2 volumes over, useful things. We lose that, but we gain the ability to store much more material. This is an image of the exterior of that library edition. In the design, I think there are clean, simple lines that echo but don't mimic the style of the original construction. At the end of the building here is a large perforated metal installation that's illuminated from behind as dusk falls and turns to night. At the moment that the moment of magic light that you see in this image, that metal sheet is illuminated and becomes a map of Kansas City and the surrounding area. And down in the corner of the addition, right here, you can see a little window that allows people to peer in and watch the robot work. Just a little bit of whimsy that helps connect people to the library and the collections. One of the real goals of the project at Kansas City was not just to extend the collection capacity, but to repurpose space that had previously been used to store that collection. By removing the bulk of the collection into that robotic storage addition, the library was able to repurpose much of the existing space. The library was able to create various collaborative workstations. More about collaborative workstations in just a moment. They were able to create flexible and adaptable spaces that students could occupy and use however they might want. They were able to create an information exchange theater here, a place where impromptu presentations could be made. And in the upper right-hand corner of this image, you have the Robot Cafe that was created. There was a certain amount of robot mania that possessed the campus. There was a Name That Robot contest. You can't really make it out in the image here, but there's Sharon Bostic, the library director at Kansas City, holding up the winning name for the robot, which was Robot. And then in the lower image, you see how the students took it upon themselves to organize the largest group that ever was assembled to do the robot dance, earning the library and the university merit from the Guinness World Book of Records folks. That was the biggest group ever assembled to do the robot dance, all in honor of the library's new robot. There were also a couple students from the library who were motivated just to, because of all the excitement about the unveiling of this new device, they created a little 2-3 minute video of how the robot works, a little animation. I wanted to show it to you. It worked on my computer. It doesn't work on this computer. So everyone, at the end of the day, go to YouTube, Google, or search on how the robot works, and you'll find it's just cute as can be, and it tickles me no end that here's something that the library was doing that just moved people to do things like make a little cartoon. It was just wonderful. Another important characteristic that's affecting the libraries we're building today is this notion of collaborative workspace. Karen Schmidt basically said she could gladly, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but she could gladly, back at Illinois Wesleyan, take out almost all the collection, put in collaborative workspaces for her students, and everyone would be very happy. These are images taken from the University of Washington's recently opened Research Commons. This is a large, flexible, adaptable space within the main library that can be configured into a wide variety of collaborative work environments. There are a number of small group study rooms like this, rooms that have dry erase whiteboard covering entire walls, for example. Even the tabletop surfaces in the library, in this Research Commons, are dry erase boards. The UW Research Commons also creates or offers content creation stations, dedicated places where small groups of students can gather together and develop multimedia presentations and other classroom assignments. There was a similar station to this tucked in among the images from the University of Missouri, Kansas City presentation. Emory University has recently opened a facility of this sort at their campus. About a year ago, Loyola University in Chicago opened what was largely trumpeted in the public relations notices as a bookless library, but was essentially this kind of collaborative information commons workspace. Here's another example of space for collaboration. This comes from an academic library in Hereford, England, in the UK. I happen to really be fond of these translucent plexiglass screens that can be relocated, regrouped, positioned around different assemblies of tables, allowing users, the students, to create a variety of impromptu study and meeting spaces. The character of reference service is changing. The ACRL Research and Planning Review Committee, in their 10 top trends in academic libraries, observed that in-person reference in many libraries is declining. More and more reference services provided by email, chat, some other kind of remote electronic connection. At Illinois Wesleyan, it's kind of my hometown academic library. At Illinois Wesleyan, as the reference collection was downsized, the public service desk, The reference desk was also downsized, making it more approachable. At the same time, staffing at that desk shifted from librarians to student aides. The student aides act as a kind of triage, handling some of the easier questions directly, forwarding the more difficult questions to the librarian on call. This is an image of a desk that I spied at the IFLA conference a couple summers ago in Göteborg, Sweden. I've come to call it the Göteborg desk. But it's typical of what I would argue is the kind of service desk we should deploy in most of our libraries. It's smaller than the traditional desk, and I would argue, therefore, more approachable. It's rounded and fluid. It's not formal and square and rectilinear, which I would say also encourages people to approach that desk. It's adjustable as to height, so you can use it in a stand-up setting and in a sit-down setting. It's on casters, so you can move it around and reposition it as needed. And there is, I don't know how well you can see it, but right here attached to the edge of the desk is an integrated power pole that stretches up almost to the ceiling and allows the library to bring electrical service and data through the ceiling and down the pole to the desktop. The small scale of this desk, the fluid form, all of this comes together in an environment that I think starts to blur the traditional line between users and staff, between us and them, which is entirely appropriate today, if not absolutely necessary, when more and more of staff needs to be working with users, looking at the same screen at the same time. You know, the library's desk, reference desk may be on wheels and it may be movable, but you do still need to plug the thing in. And with that in mind, one of the things that gets me excited about the coming generation of library buildings is that the design and building trades are developing new products. There are new products that have come to market that will give us a chance to create space that is truly adaptable, flexible, and responsive. For generations, going back to the mid-20th century, World War II, thereabouts, the librarian's mantra when it comes to buildings has been flexibility. The building must be flexible, responsive to meet the changing needs of the user and the library, but the fact is the designs have been more fixed than flexible. It's been the nature of buildings. But today I look at features like this. This is a raised floor system that will allow libraries to move electrical and data transmission services from the ceiling plenum where they traditionally have been located into the floors. Now, this is not really a new concept. For a long time, designers have been able to create access floors or computer floors, but they've been deployed very sparingly because of costs, because they've not been engineered to bear the load of library book stacks. When the Ames Library at IWU opened in 2002, the design employed a raised floor in certain parts of the library. In the reference department, for example, where there was a large deployment of computers for public use, and in many staff workrooms, such as technical services. But the stacks had a conventional floor system. Today, raised floor systems are becoming more economical. They can bear the weight of library book stacks, and a library that installs a system like this will be able to reposition desks and other resources. The other two images on this slide come from the public library in Vancouver, Canada, British Columbia. Here you see a large atrium space where you see the edge of the floor. And here's a close-up of that floor where you can see the raised floor, surface floor above the subfloor, creating a space through which they can run electrical service and other such features. One more trend that's very prevalent these days is the idea of developing the library as a one-stop shop. Virtually every library that I've worked with over the last several years, Friends University in Wichita, Kansas, Marymount College in LA, Beloit College in Wisconsin, all of them have been interested in bringing together with the library other features on campus, other offices such as the Writing Center, the tutoring center, a testing center, maybe a faculty development center where faculty members can work on curriculum development projects and the like. The idea of this library as a one-stop shop creates a critical issue that relates to design. Call it a matter of ownership and identity. How do these various partner agencies maintain their distinct identities when under the same roof? At Friends University, there was an ongoing debate through the early planning stages regarding the entry to the library and the entry to the writing center. Was there going to be direct access to the writing center, or would students who were having to go to who wanted to go to the writing center, were they going to have to go into the library and then into the writing center? Staff from the writing center were expressing some concerns that if they had to first go into the library space, it would somehow diminish the identity of the writing center. The last trend that I want to highlight is the notion of the library as place. Barbie mentioned in her presentation that people maybe aren't coming to the library, and librarians need to be ready to go out to find the user where they happen to be. I would agree with that. But I also am observing that in many instances the library remains a vital and actively used place. Again, Karen Schmidt from the Illinois Wesleyan University Library commented that there are very few things that a student can't get without coming to the library. The students at IWU can get just about everything they need without coming to the library, and yet they come. The Ames Library is one of the most popular, most visited buildings on the Illinois Wesleyan campus. In the current issue of American Libraries, Stephen Escar Smith and Carmelita Pickett write of how libraries can avoid the path to obsolescence. Magnificent buildings, flashy web pages, big budgets don't always make the difference, they say. But students want answers to their questions. They want it now, they want it fast, and they want it personal. With regard to buildings, Pickett and Smith suggest that the user will be looking for different kinds of space to meet differing needs at differing times. Quiet study space sometimes, room for group research other times, social exchange, inspiration. To the degree that the user finds those spaces, the library will be successful. Smith and Pickett write, quote, "If we are to retain a meaningful bricks and mortar component to our services, we must deploy our spaces with the aim of delivering to our patrons the room they need when they need it." Rather like Ranganathan's laws. Every reader his book, every book its reader, every user his or her space, every space its user. So the quality of space is important, this sense of the library as place. I want to encourage you to pursue this notion of the library as place and that it can be revealed in an inspirational quality in our buildings and our designs. I've long said that good design and good library design should inspire good posture. There should be something about the building that makes us stand a little straighter, makes us feel a little better about ourselves and a little better about the institution. Our buildings should touch us. As I close, I want to offer two examples, neither of which happen to come from the library world, but sometimes I like to use non-library examples because it illustrates how pervasive some of these issues are. The first comes from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the East Wing, designed by I.M. Pei, opened about a generation ago. I heard a story about the East Wing once. Frankly, I don't know if it's true, and I don't care because it's a good story. The story goes that shortly after the East Wing opened, stanchions were erected. Stanchions and ropes were erected around the corners of this building to keep people away. As the story goes, it turns out that these sharp, crisp, cold edges of angles of stone in the corners of this iconic building were so enticing to people that they were compelled to come to those corners, reach out and run their hands over those sharp edges of stone. The building was so engaging, so compelling that people actually had to touch it. And the oils on their fingers had started to discolor and wear away the stone. And so the stanchions and ropes went up. The other example that I like to use is of the Milwaukee Art Museum and the expansion, specifically the expansion designed by Santiago Calatrava. Shortly after it opened, I mean, it opened to almost as much notice as Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. Shortly after it opened, I was interested in seeing the building. My oldest daughter was in college at the time, happened to be flying out of Milwaukee to go somewhere or other, so I said, I'll take you in for your flight. It's an early morning flight, let's go the day before, and that way Dad can look at this building. And it was simply magnificent. Now my daughter, I'm pretty sure, didn't have then and doesn't have now a good idea what Dad does, but she knows that Dad works with buildings and he works with architects. At one point, after we'd been in this space for a while, she and I met down at the far end of the main hall. Bottom part of the image, the two middle images at the bottom of the screen. We met in that space. That room cantilevers out over the shore of Lake Michigan. She and I were alone, looking at over the lake from high above, and Karen said, "You know,
Dad." 1 minute. I'm sorry.
I'm there. I'll talk fast. We're just there. One more slide, okay? Karen said, "Dad, I wish we didn't have to go back to the hotel this evening. I wish we could just roll out our sleeping bags and stay here for the night." She didn't realize it, but that building was working on her. It was speaking to her, affecting her, and that's what I hope our libraries can do. Last thing I want to do is share 3 of my favorite planning quotes with you. The first comes from Walt Whitman. "The future is no more uncertain than the present." I like that because you can read that, you can interpret that in 2 very different ways. Either the present is certain, and we therefore can believe that the future is going to be, we know the present, we therefore know that the future is going to be certain, and we can stride into the future with confidence. On the other hand, we might read it by saying, well, we don't know what the future is, and so we don't really know what's going on in the present, and that kind of calls into question everything there is. The second quote that I like to use all the time comes from that noted British architect, Winston Churchill, who said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." Just a little reminder of how important it is to plan buildings well. And the last quote comes actually from an architect, Daniel Burnham, who said, "Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir man's blood. So dream big, aspire, and inspire." How'd I do?
Thank you so much, Anders. Brevemente, creo que mis comentarios serán muy breves, pues nos han presentado sobre todo que no hay una biblioteca del futuro, pero sí la biblioteca del presente tiene que irse adaptando a las necesidades de los usuarios actuales. Los cambios que han tenido el interior de los espacios en las bibliotecas, cómo se han ido adaptando, la disyuntiva, si se encogen las colecciones o se compran menos libros en papel para dar más espacio a los materiales virtuales, o, como nos presentó de otra biblioteca, seguir comprando libros, buscar nuevas soluciones para almacenamiento de más libros, como esta que usa la robótica, que nos presentó, porque el libro sigue siendo muy importante y pues es un medio que pues se sigue utilizando y pensamos que por muchos años más, aparte de todo lo que venga virtual y de lo que todavía ni siquiera nos imaginamos. No sé si Barbie o Anders mencionó que a lo mejor vamos a traer un chip las siguientes generaciones, ¿sí? Y en la cabeza, y nos llegará la información así, a lo mejor ya ni ocuparemos el aditamento que pues se ha ido reduciendo de cómo se presentó, se ha ido encogiendo. Pues nos ha dado una panorámica muy interesante el trabajo del maestro Anders, y ahora sí vamos a entrar de lleno a presentar al arquitecto José Ignacio Nuño Morales, ya el punto de vista de un arquitecto. El arquitecto, bueno, tiene su grado por la Universidad Iberoamericana, recibiendo con mención especial la tesis del proyecto de un edificio para Hemeroteca Nacional. Entonces, muy interesante su trabajo, arquitecto que ha tenido interés en bibliotecas y archivos desde que hizo sus estudios. Fue profesor de proyectos de la misma Universidad Iberoamericana por varios años. Ha publicado en revistas especializadas artículos sobre arquitectura. Quiero mencionar que ha trabajado en diferentes proyectos para el Distrito Federal del 79 al 80, del 81 al 83, trabajó para la Secretaría de Asentamientos Humanos y Obras Públicas. Posteriormente fue director de normas y proyectos de la Dirección General de Equipamiento Urbano y Edificios de la Secretaría de Desarrollo Urbano y Ecología. A partir de ese año, del 89, su trabajo lo ha desarrollado en forma independiente como socio y director general de la empresa AEI Centro de Proyectos, eso es aquí en el Distrito Federal, y donde han elaborado cerca de 100 estudios y proyectos. En materia de bibliotecas, además de anteproyectos para distintas bibliotecas públicas, realizó los proyectos de la Biblioteca del Instituto Nacional de Administración Pública, la Biblioteca del Congreso de la Unión en el Palacio Legislativo de San Lázaro y el Archivo Histórico de Pemex en las instalaciones de la Refinería 18 de Marzo, México, Distrito Federal. Pues arquitecto, atentos a lo que nos tiene que decir.
Muchas gracias, maestra. Buenas tardes. Yo debo decir en principio que estoy de acuerdo con Barbie en el sentido de que los edificios y los anaqueles no son lo más importante en una biblioteca. De manera que encuentro un tanto fuera de lugar que un arquitecto pretenda dilucidar cómo serán las bibliotecas del futuro, ya no se diga dentro de 15 años, sino en un futuro mucho más inmediato. Porque al arquitecto le corresponde en este tema, como en cualquier otro, responder a los requerimientos de funcionamiento u operación planteado por los clientes, los usuarios o los especialistas. De suerte que los recursos propios del oficio del arquitecto deben estar al servicio de quienes los demanden. En el caso de las bibliotecas, pues de los bibliotecarios, de los especialistas en la planificación de bibliotecas, de los propios usuarios. Si como todo parece indicar, los acervos tradicionales en papel van a reducirse sustancialmente en forma paulatina o incluso a desaparecer en algunas bibliotecas, es algo que finalmente no van a determinar los arquitectos, sino los bibliotecarios, para cada caso particular. Pienso entonces que esencialmente la labor del arquitecto que proyecta en el futuro una biblioteca universitaria no diferirá en gran cosa de lo que es en la actualidad o de lo que debe ser en la actualidad. Es decir, a partir de los lineamientos establecidos por los responsables de su planeación y operación, dimensionar, organizar y estructurar correctamente las áreas en razón de su capacidad y de sus interrelaciones funcionales mediante un esquema de circulaciones horizontales y verticales claro, eficiente y accesible para cualquier tipo de usuario. Propiciar condiciones de confort, en esto hizo énfasis Anders, de confort, seguridad e higiene, atendiendo todos los factores físico-ambientales que inciden en la habitabilidad de los espacios, como la iluminación, la acústica, la temperatura, el control solar, lograr una conformación volumétrica y espacial, a lo que también se refirió Anders, que resulte interesante y armónica y que se relacione con su contexto urbano o natural en forma congruente, contribuyendo a mantener o generar un entorno también armónico y atractivo. Y por último, coordinar la participación de los múltiples especialistas que participan en el proyecto de una biblioteca, que son muchos más que el arquitecto. Es decir, hay especialistas en ingeniería estructural, especialistas en instalaciones eléctricas, hidrosanitarias, de aire acondicionado, de voz y datos, de costos, se hacen estudios de impacto ambiental, estudios de impacto urbano, en fin, hay muchas gentes que participan en el desarrollo del proyecto de una biblioteca y desde luego en la construcción, pues otros tantos, ¿no? En cuestión de materiales y procedimientos constructivos, pues es difícil prever lo que la tecnología ponga en uso dentro de 15 años. Sin embargo, bueno, pueden anticiparse algunas cosas. Probablemente las alfombras, que han sido de uso muy socorrido en las bibliotecas, pues sean sustituidos quizá por algunos pisos aulados reciclables. Suponemos también que los fabricantes de plafones acústicos pues nos ofrecerán nuevas alternativas más eficaces, más eficientes, más económicas. En materia, por ejemplo, de cancelería, pues en los últimos años hemos visto progresos realmente muy impresionantes, lo que nos permite pues utilizar superficies acristaladas mucho mayores, con mejor en condiciones térmicas y acústicas para el interior del edificio. Por lo que se refiere al mobiliario, pues ya también Anders nos hacía algunas sugerencias de lo que pueden ser los muebles en una biblioteca del futuro. Yo creo que radicalmente pues no podrán cambiar, porque las condiciones antropométricas y ergonómicas de las personas seguirán siendo las mismas en el futuro que hoy, ¿no? Habrá probablemente algunas innovaciones formales, como las que nos mostraba Anders, y a lo mejor la utilización de algunos otros materiales que en este momento no se utilicen con suficiente frecuencia. Otra tendencia que es indiscutible es el uso de la arquitectura bioclimática, en cualquier caso, pero particularmente en un clima como el de la República Mexicana, en donde buena parte de nuestro territorio pues tiene condiciones climáticas benignas, en donde es perfectamente factible lograr la ventilación natural de los espacios y la iluminación, desde luego también en muchos de los casos, sin que eso perjudique el confort de los usuarios ni el mantenimiento del material. Hay otra cuestión de la que se habla mucho, que es estos famosos edificios inteligentes, ¿no?, que se ha convertido un poco en una, ¿qué diríamos? Realmente hay dispositivos útiles que han mejorado aspectos en la seguridad, en la autosustentabilidad de las construcciones, en el ahorro de energía eléctrica, en el ahorro del uso del agua, pero muchas de esas cosas son un espejismo. Es decir, finalmente un edificio inteligente es el que está bien resuelto arquitectónicamente en los términos tradicionales que han estado presentes en la arquitectura siempre. Estamos hablando de la calidad espacial, de la calidad formal, del confort que se pueda lograr en el edificio, también nos habló Anders, de qué tan a gusto se siente el usuario dentro del edificio. Bueno, finalmente ese es el objetivo fundamental. Entonces, eso es por lo que se refiere a grandes rasgos, digamos, al uso de materiales. Al margen de esas consideraciones generales, voy a intentar hacer algunas puntualizaciones sobre lo que creo que debe ser la biblioteca del futuro, particularmente en un país como México, que en nuestras circunstancias pues son distintas a las de otros países, ¿no? Primero, no creo que lograr una arquitectura atractiva, incluso emocionante, tenga que ver con este afán de encaramarse en el mercado del espectáculo arquitectónico, con grandilocuentes, vociferantes o estridentes propuestas. Nosotros no podemos darnos el lujo de hacer edificios que cuesten 10 veces más simplemente por lograr efectos formales más atractivos. Necesitamos ser mucho más racionales, porque el propósito de una biblioteca finalmente es servir al usuario. Evidentemente el arquitecto tiene la obligación de lograr un resultado formal, insisto, interesante, atractivo, armónico, unitario, pero si es posible utilizando los menores recursos a su alcance. La otra cuestión, bueno, también tiene que ver con lo que nos mostraba Anders. A raíz de que me invitaron a darles esta plática o a exponerles algunos puntos de vista en términos arquitectónicos, me acerqué con un poco más de detalle a esta famosa biblioteca Mansueto, que ha sido muy difundida y que tiene cosas en común con la biblioteca de la Universidad de Missouri, Kansas City, que nos mostró Anders en su presentación. Y recogí algunos datos que son interesantes como referencia para dimensionar lo que un enfoque de esa naturaleza puede representar en un caso como el nuestro. En el caso de la Biblioteca Mansueto, todos estos datos los recogí de internet. Si alguno no es preciso, bueno, pues les pido una disculpa, pero según esto alberga 3.500.000 libros en un espacio que reduce en 7 veces la capacidad de almacenamiento tradicional, dato que coincide con el que nos dio Anders respecto de la universidad en Kansas City. A todos nos impactan los sofisticados sistemas automatizados empleados en esta biblioteca, que costó, de acuerdo otra vez con los datos que recogí, 81 millones de dólares. Para darles esa referencia comparativa, calculo que alojar 3,5 millones de libros a la usanza más convencional, es decir, con circulaciones fijas, ni siquiera con sistemas de anaqueles móviles sobre rieles, exigiría aproximadamente 12.600 metros cuadrados de construcción, que conforme a los costos actuales del mercado, hablo del mercado de la Ciudad de México, supondría una inversión en términos redondos de 151 millones de pesos, es decir, aproximadamente 11.650.000 dólares. Estamos hablando exclusivamente de lo que es el acervo. Si consideramos arbitrariamente, si ustedes quieren, que las áreas de lectura, oficinas y servicios complementarios demanden una inversión similar, que creo que no es tan descabellado pensar en que estas áreas representen el 50% del edificio de los que tenían un acervo tradicional. Después hablaremos ya de los acervos compactados o de los que desaparecen. Bueno, el caso es que si así fueran las cosas, una biblioteca para albergar 3,5 millones de libros costaría en México 24 millones de dólares. Por lo que con los 81 millones de la Biblioteca Mansueto podríamos construir aquí 3 unidades equivalentes. Conforme a lo mencionado, podemos concluir que una automatización como la mencionada puede representar ventajas en algunos conceptos, pero no debe verse como la panacea ni como el patrón a seguir en nuestras circunstancias. Habrá casos particulares en donde la disponibilidad de espacio es tan reducida que, bueno, necesariamente tendrán que acudirse a sistemas de esta naturaleza, pero en general no creo que ese deba ser el enfoque que podamos darle nosotros, porque nuestras circunstancias económicas no nos lo permiten. Otra cuestión que también se ha mencionado reiteradamente en distintas exposiciones es que las bibliotecas se están transformando. Lo que antes era acervo se está convirtiendo en otro tipo de espacio, pero muchas veces no saben si van a disponer de los recursos suficientes para digitalizar esa información. Entonces, yo creo que un enfoque razonable es hacer que, en general, los espacios de cualquier biblioteca que se construya en un futuro inmediato puedan transformarse con facilidad en cualquier cosa, lo cual parece sencillo, pero no es así. Digo, veamos, por ejemplo, el caso de la Biblioteca Central de la Universidad, la antigua, pues todo el área de acervo es imposible de transformarse en áreas de lectura, de oficinas y otra cosa, porque está totalmente cerrada. Antes lo convencional era el acervo, hacer una zona completamente aislada, cerrada, porque bueno, eso representaba ahorros en el acondicionamiento ambiental, pero esa tendencia también creo que ya desapareció, pero ahora con más énfasis tendremos que pensar en que hay que desecharla, ¿no? Los edificios tendrán que proyectarse para que se transformen. En la cuestión de las instalaciones, pues sería interesante también hacer un análisis de lo que representa este doble piso, que desde luego es indiscutiblemente útil para darle flexibilidad a las instalaciones, pero que también en mi experiencia particular, que lo he utilizado en algún edificio de oficinas, resultó en aquel entonces, hace unos 5 años, extraordinariamente caro. Es probable que poco a poco esto pueda irse haciendo más económico y en el futuro podamos utilizarlo con más flexibilidad, ¿no? Bueno, en lo personal pienso que todavía por bastante tiempo, si no es que, bueno, por lo menos por bastante tiempo, el material impreso coexistirá en mayor o en menor medida con la información electrónica, pero aún bajo el supuesto de que el material impreso prácticamente desaparezca en algunas bibliotecas y los contenidos puedan encontrarse no solo en CDs, DVDs y en otros soportes, sino en la red de Internet, la necesidad de contar en las universidades y en general, distribuidos por todos los centros de población, con sitios propicios para leer e investigar, no podrá desaparecer. Nosotros podemos tener acceso a la red prácticamente en cualquier lugar, en un jardín, en una cafetería, pero muchos de esos lugares no son propicios para la lectura ni por placer ni por investigación. Es decir, necesitamos tener un sitio adecuado para leer. Entonces, probablemente los almacenes de libros, ya también nos han hablado de ellos, desaparezcan, las bibliotecas no sean almacenes de libros, pero la necesidad de contar con un espacio propicio para la lectura va a ser, creo que siempre necesario. Pensemos en el caso de México, por ejemplo, las grandes unidades habitacionales que albergan a la mayoría de la población de nuestro país. Estamos hablando de viviendas de 55 metros cuadrados o menos, las hay desde 30 y tantos metros cuadrados, que alojan hasta 6 personas, 5 punto y fracción en promedio. Evidentemente en ese lugar no tienen las condiciones propicias para leer, para estudiar, para concentrarse en la lectura por un tiempo prolongado. De manera que eso demuestra que las bibliotecas públicas necesariamente tienen que seguir existiendo. Es más, yo propondría que así como el reglamento de construcción del Distrito Federal y los planes de uso del suelo determinan que en fraccionamientos de cierto o en desarrollos urbanos de cierta magnitud se tenga que proporcionar cierta infraestructura, jardines, equipamiento deportivo, una escuela primaria, una escuela secundaria, sea obligatorio que se ofrezca un espacio destinado a biblioteca. Llamémosle si quieren espacio de lectura o de investigación, en donde a lo mejor no hay libros y todo es por internet, ¿no? Y las consultas a los bibliotecarios se tendrán que hacer también por internet, porque es difícil pensar que en cada una de estas bibliotecas pueda haber un bibliotecario especialista. Finalmente, tengo otras anotaciones, pero ya de una u otra forma se ha abordado el asunto en distintas exposiciones. Hay una cuestión que también creo que va a transformar radicalmente los recursos destinados a las bibliotecas. No solamente va a ser la reducción en la cuestión del acervo, y es un aspecto que aparentemente no tiene mucho que ver con las bibliotecas, pero es la cuestión del transporte. Actualmente, el reglamento de construcciones del Distrito Federal señala que por cada 60 metros cuadrados de área construida de la biblioteca, sea acervo, sea sala de lectura, sea lo que sea, se otorgue un cajón de estacionamiento. Un cajón de estacionamiento en autoservicio exige un promedio de 30 metros cuadrados, considerando rampas y áreas de circulación. O sea que viene siendo la tercera parte del área total de la biblioteca la que se tiene que destinar a estacionamiento. La tendencia natural, sobre todo en una ciudad como la nuestra, es que el transporte colectivo prevalezca sobre el transporte individual, y si el transporte individual dentro de 15 años existe, seguramente va a ser muy distinto del que conocemos ahora. Serán automóviles mucho más compactos, pero desde luego predominará el transporte colectivo, y esto tendrá una repercusión indudable en los requerimientos de estacionamiento y en consecuencia en las inversiones requeridas para construir una biblioteca. De manera que todo eso está a favor de que las bibliotecas se multipliquen. Por un lado, las reducciones en el acervo, por otro lado, la reducción en el estacionamiento. Pues creo que eso sería lo fundamental. Muchas gracias.
Nos quedan pocos minutos. Le quiero agradecer al arquitecto, y yo creo que hablo a nombre de todos, que somos la mayoría bibliotecarios. El punto de vista de un arquitecto que es tan importante en la conformación y el diseño de un espacio físico, una biblioteca, y todos los elementos que hay que tomar en cuenta que afectarán el tamaño y la ubicación de una biblioteca. Bueno, obviamente Universitaria es más fácil, está en un centro o campus universitario, pero sobre todo lo que mencionó de las públicas, cerca de las viviendas, pues sería otro México, arquitecto, sí, porque esto es parte de la democratización de la información, de que el ciudadano pueda gozar de una libertad de acceso a la información y encontrar estos puntos que son tan necesarios. Me recuerda un poco cuando trabajé en Chicago, decreto, una situación legal municipal decretó que cada 2 kilómetros de distancia a pie debe de haber una biblioteca, y por eso tiene una red de bibliotecas muy buena, una de las mejores de Estados Unidos, en donde si no hay taxis o hay una huelga o el autobús no corre por X circunstancia, las personas puedan llegar a pie de una biblioteca a otra y cerca de su vivienda. Esto provoca que las personas tengan el acceso, ya sea impreso o por los medios electrónicos, lo facilita el acceso a la información. Creo que las 3 ponencias complementan perfectamente el tema de esta mesa, los espacios virtuales y físicos. En términos generales, los 3 ponentes dan un énfasis a las necesidades del usuario, la respuesta de la biblioteca para irse adaptando a todos los cambios y la transformación que la sociedad está teniendo y seguirá teniendo. Muy difícil decir cuál será el modelo perfecto o exacto, no existe, pero las recomendaciones que nos dieron cada uno de ustedes creo que nos da a todos una panorámica muy completa, y la necesidad, el aspecto del bibliotecario, el aspecto del planeador, el que planifica los espacios, el que construye y hace los diseños. Yo tengo una pregunta a los 3 y no sé quién lo quiera comentar. Dado que todos sabemos que existe el cambio climático, ¿sí? Se hablaron de materiales, Anders presentó algunos con unos transparentes, no sé si esos materiales sean contaminantes o no, se habla de las alfombras, sustancias químicas, incluso desde el tipo de papel que manejamos puede causarnos un daño. Ahora yo traslado esta idea y les pregunto, ¿hasta dónde creen que los edificios de bibliotecas universitarias y públicas sean verdes en un futuro para la sustentabilidad del medio ambiente? En México, arquitecto, ¿cuántos años cree que tardaría que toda la construcción de bibliotecas puedan ser verdes?
Bueno, eso es…
50 años, 30.
Pues mire, transformar las bibliotecas existentes en bibliotecas autosustentables es francamente muy difícil. Las nuevas, bueno, pues eso yo creo que es muy sencillo. Son dispositivos, lo mencioné de pasada en mi exposición, relativamente sencillos de utilizar. Habría que ver qué entendemos por bibliotecas verdes, ¿no? Yo no soy muy partidario de forrar los edificios de enredaderas, ¿no? No creo que eso sea lo verde propiamente, ¿no? Me parece que desde luego es deseable que haya un cierto contacto con la naturaleza en las bibliotecas, pero bueno, yo concretándome a su pregunta, yo creo que en este momento es muy sencillo hacerlo, recolectar el agua de lluvia para reutilizarla en los sanitarios, tener una pequeña planta de tratamiento para utilizar las aguas negras, utilizar, por ejemplo, sensores de presencia para que no esté la luz prendida todo el tiempo. Todas esas cosas ya las conocemos, ya se utilizan, de manera que cualquier biblioteca que se construya de aquí en adelante perfectamente puede hacer uso de esos medios. Entonces, lo difícil es adaptar las bibliotecas existentes a esta condición, pero para las nuevas no le veo ningún problema, ¿no? Aunque, insisto, me parece que lo más importante que eso es resolverlas arquitectónicamente en forma correcta y lograr un resultado que de ser posible, como mencionaba Anders, pues nos emocione, nos dé una identidad especial, nos cause realmente gusto estar ahí, ¿no?
¿Alguna respuesta, Anders?
I have to emphasize at this moment that I'm not an architect, I'm not an engineer, I'm a librarian, so I cannot speak with the authority that Jose may, but, and I have to be honest.
I'm going to translate because not everybody,
okay.
no todos tienen audífono, ¿verdad?
Ajá.
Los audífonos. Que no es arquitecto, bueno, casi creo que todos entendemos inglés, y no hay necesidad de traducir. ¿Todos traen audífonos? Ah, bueno.
Okay.
Del público, perfecto. Seguimos.
I'm also not as directly familiar with the Mexican market, certainly, as I am with, say, the market in the States, but I have been struck over the last 5 years, 6 years, at how quickly and how thoroughly the idea of green design has been assimilated in the American marketplace. The libraries that I'm working with, the communities, the schools, the institutions, it's basically an expectation today that there is some measure of green design built into the libraries. Every architectural firm that I've worked with over the last 5 years has LEED certified architects and designers as part of the firm. It's commonplace. There are only two real questions anymore that, in my experience. One is, what level of green do we want to pursue in terms of LEED design? You have silver and gold and platinum and so forth. It's the question of what level do you want to pursue? And the other question is, do you want to be certified as a green building? If you want to be certified, there are additional record-keeping requirements, and there's a commissioning process at the end of the building project as you move into the building, and that involves a certain amount of money, and you have to just decide whether you want to spend the money to get the certificate that you can put on the wall, or you just do the right thing, and not get, do the design, do the right thing. You don't get the certificate, but you know you did the right thing.
Peggy, you have any comments on this issue?
No, I think
it's okay, completed. Sí, como no, arquitecto.
Un dato que creo que es interesante. Yo participé como supervisor del proyecto del Parque Bicentenario que se construyó en Azcapotzalco, y ahí se pretendió que los edificios tuvieran el certificado LEED. Y resulta que para que tuvieran el certificado LEED, como detectaron que la atmósfera en México está contaminada, entonces los edificios tenían que tener aire acondicionado, lo cual me parece un contrasentido verdaderamente risible, ¿no? O sea, lo natural es precisamente nuestro clima, tener ventilación natural. Aquí la exigencia era que los edificios tuvieran aire acondicionado para que les dieran el certificado y lo pudieran colgar en la pared, ¿no?
Sí, porque se exige que también la calidad del aire interno sea la mejor posible para los trabajadores y los usuarios. Entonces, pues tendría que ser un mundo perfecto, y cosa que es imposible. Yo quiero agradecer, y creo que la conclusión general sería, si hay alguna pregunta, podemos recibirla antes de llegar a una conclusión general. Faltan 4 minutos. Si tienen una pregunta concreta para los ponentes, a ver. Sí, no problem.
voy a hacerlo en inglés, pero como es más fácil que me traduzcan del español o del inglés, no sé. Just because you are two and you're only one that you can't understand. My question, well, I have a lot of questions regarding the buildings and stuff. I think it's amazing world, but you didn't speak about accessibility. I mean, there's new conditions about people with handicap conditions, and they need accessibility issues to go through the library. And I'm working in web accessibility, but they cannot reach the web, they cannot reach the building. That's the first question. And the second one is about how do you think we will call the university libraries in the future? Because in Spain, we have a trend that we call them CRAE, which is the acronym in Spanish of Research Centers of Education and Research. It's something that you say, Anders, in your talk about information commons. Do you think we have to change the word, we have to change the way that we speak about the university libraries? We say, there is the university library, and what are the expectations about the university library name, and what the students reach there?
Mm-hmm. Anders, please.
Yeah, I think with regard to questions of accessibility, again, I will preface my comments by saying that my experience is centered in the States, and I'd say that issues of accessibility in the States today are quite, in terms of physical accessibility, mm-hmm. quite similar to what I described in terms of green design. I mean, mm-hmm. It's a given, basically. The assumption is you will, that you will have a building that complies with U.S. requirements for accessibility. That said, you still run into libraries occasionally. I was working just last week, 2 weeks ago, I was visiting a library in Western Illinois, a small community, a rural community. And they said that they didn't comply with those requirements. And I read them the Riot Act, because it's 20 years since we strengthened those requirements and regulations. And why aren't you doing the right thing? The comments were made earlier with regard to green design and energy efficiency, that it's much more difficult to comply with those regulations with existing buildings. Same thing is true with accessibility. Although in the States, the requirements and the regulations for accessibility in public places it's a higher bar. It's a higher level of effort that you have to, if you want to avoid meeting those requirements, you have to have exceptionally strong arguments. I think the only other thing that I would say with regard to accessibility is to reminisce about a presentation that I heard 20 years ago when the Americans with Disabilities Act had first been passed, where one of the speakers reminded the audience that it's not that the world is divided into people who are disabled and abled, but the world is divided into people who are disabled and those who are temporarily abled. Okay. Which brings home, I think, why it's important. As for what the name of the institution should be, call me old-fashioned, but I rather like library.
Yes, absolutely. The same, I think the same. Thank you, Anders. Pues la conclusión general, creo que el éxito de una biblioteca del futuro es tomar en cuenta las necesidades de la sociedad en que estamos viviendo, el momento histórico en el que vivimos, el futuro que estamos creando, estar atentos a las necesidades de los usuarios, conocer de todos los equipos que puedan ir resolviendo y las tecnologías resolviendo las necesidades básicas de todo ser humano, que van a ser las necesidades de ser un ser saludable, un ser educado, un ser útil a la sociedad, teniendo ese balance entre la arquitectura, el trabajo que hacemos los bibliotecarios, los espacios adecuados, la ubicación de la biblioteca en donde debe de estar. Creo que pues es un granito de arena para lograr un mundo mejor, ciudadanos mejor informados y que tomen mejores decisiones, y bueno, y que vaya desapareciendo poco a poco esta desigualdad que hay de la distancia tecnológica, se acabe esto. Y bueno, creo que felicitar a todos ustedes, los que están aquí también interesados en estos temas, y agradecerle a nuestros ponentes, muy interesante cada aspecto que complementó los diferentes puntos de vista de los espacios físicos y virtuales. Y agradecerles a ustedes, muchas gracias y buenas tardes.